One of the things I've started doing with my students recently is practicing like kind of what I would call maybe formal or really more just efficient note-taking skills. And the reason that I have been doing a lot of this is because there's a lot of expository text to read right now. And if you haven't heard that term before, expository text is the kind of text that's more informative text. It's not really narrative style. It's not fiction. So typically anything that isn't really literature, we might call expository text. So that's going to be stuff like articles that you read, or if you're reading a section of a textbook that's informative about some topic. This also doesn't have to be text. You could have expository information coming at you in a couple different kinds of mediums, such as if you're in any kind of public school setting, you may have some lecturing going on and you're expected to kind of be able to glean that information and remember that information. Or you might be watching a TED Talk video, or any sort of non-text expository information you're getting is probably via video. It could be teaching, or it could just be an informative video. So anyway, there's lots of expository text right now coming at us because there's just a lot of news. There's a lot of news right now, and also there's a lot of questions circulating right now amongst just all of us, adult or child. We're in a period of history right now. We're living history right now where there's a lot of unknowns. So there's probably a lot of Googling happening. A lot of people maybe reading more statistics and facts and research and all kinds of stuff. And I was noticing that even amongst my students, they are obviously very aware of this pandemic that we're going through, and they have questions about what that means, and they have topics that now they're interested in that perhaps they weren't really interested in before. So it just was a good opportunity to start digging into what do we do with expository text, and what are some skills around that. And one of the biggest skills that students who struggle with reading and writing, but really honestly, any reader or writer probably needs some explicit teaching in note-taking skills with expository type information. You may be a good note taker, or you may feel like you were never a good note taker. Regardless, it actually is a skill that needs to be taught. You may be someone who kind of naturally has a good sense of how to take notes, but I generally find that with a typical learner or struggling learner, this is a kind of skill I'm working on explicitly with them at some point. So I'm going to give you a little bit of just a little bit of information and teaching on some of the ways I've been doing that with students lately. The kinds of things I'm showing you today are just write-ups and stuff that I've done on the materials that I have, and feel free to take notes, take screenshots. So the first thing I've done with students lately is I've taught them about a process of note-taking that we call outlining. This has kind of fallen by the wayside in education, I have found, over the years. And, if you're in I was taught outlining. I think that was more to do with the fact that I was mostly taught by my mother in homeschool, and she's a big fan of outlining. But had I been in public school, I think most people in their mid to late 20s probably haven't really been formally taught outlining as a note-taking skill. Maybe if you're in your 30s, 40s, 50s, that's probably more the age in which maybe it was taught to you in school. Also, if you were taught by parents, depending on whether parents think that was, helpful to them, they may have taught you, but it hasn't really been taught in these past 10 or 15 years of schooling. Official note-taking skills isn't really taught to kids. Kids are kind of expected to figure out, they're just told, my students tell me, they just told me to take notes, and then they'll bring me some notes, and I'm like, these are the notes you took. Now, some of that I know is, because we are dealing with some impaired reading and writing skills sometimes, but a lot of it has to do with the fact that they've really never been taught how to take notes. So I teach them the process of note outlining, and I do want to just start by saying that outlining, when I use the term outlining in respect to note taking, I'm not talking about the way we use the term outlining when we're talking about like making a plan for a paper. A lot of times people use the term outlining when they're referring to that, like we're going to outline your paper. And that's legitimate. We do use the term for that. It is related, but it's not quite the same thing, okay? So the first thing I do with students is, if you've taken our LA Binder class, we create a handmade LA Binder page about what note-taking outlining outlining looks like. So if you're taking notes, this is sort of the formula, or the format, I guess is a word I like better, of what a note outline looks like. And so we basically make an LA Binder page that looks something like this. I'm using my Rocket book here, and I'm going to kind of back it up for you a little bit so you can see all of it. I wrote outline of outlining because that's what I'm essentially doing. I'm showing you kind of the format of what outline note-taking looks like, okay? And we talk about all the symbols that you see on here and how that helps us organize our thoughts of something that we're reading. So we use what's called a Roman numeral, this is hard to do because I have backwards, a Roman numeral I for the main topic, okay? I'm just going to kind of quickly run through this, and then I'll talk about some of the things that might seem obvious and aren't so obvious and need to be explicitly taught with students. So we put our main topic next to a Roman numeral. If you have something underneath that main topic that's still kind of big but sort of nests under that main topic, we call that a subtopic, and we would always indent and use a capital letter. So if we've started with our Roman numeral 1, which looks like a capital I, and we have one subtopic underneath that, it's going to be indented, and the first capital letter we would use is an A. And then if there are some details or thoughts you have about that subtopic, we start numbering those. We indent again. Anything that's nested under a previous topic or header always gets indented again. And we start numbering with regular numbers any details or thoughts that go underneath a lettered subtopic. So if I had a detail or a thought, I might label that number 1. Maybe there was another detail or thought, I label number 2. And say underneath that second detail or thought, there was maybe even more of a sub or a smaller detail. I call this like a detail within a detail. Something that's just a little clarification of that detail, but it's not a whole new detail, it's part of this detail. I now would indent again and then start using lowercase letters. A, B, if I had a couple of those that went under detail 2. And then if we go back out to kind of another subtopic of our main topic here, we have to indent all the way back out, almost all the way back out, and label that as a capital letter B. That would be another subtopic. I label that. Any thoughts or details indented again, and number 1. Any smaller thoughts under that are a lowercase a. And then if I would move back out to a whole new main topic, maybe the lecturer or whatever medium you're listening to, but let's say this was a teacher talking, they're like moving on to a whole new topic. Then I have to go all the way back out to the left, and I use my Roman numeral 2, and I label that new main topic. And then I kind of follow this format again. Now this is going to change depending on how many details or things I have, or I hear, or I see, or I read, right? If there's more than one subtopic or not, right? So like this isn't going to always look exactly like this. I was giving some sort of examples of where it could go. But basically kids need to know that main topics are all the way out to the left, have a Roman numeral. Subtopics indent a little with a capital. Smaller thoughts or details underneath a subtopic get numbered. For the most part, I tend to use these first 3 levels, and then the sub details only happen once in a while. It kind of depends on the, maybe the organization of an article. So we'll talk about that a little bit. So one of the things I want to say, I'm going to put that down now while I talk a little bit, is often when I'm creating this sort of format as an LA Binder page, I have to do some talking and discussion with students about what those terms mean, depending on the age of your student. If I have a student who's maybe already in high school, they may be a little bit more familiar with some of those terms, maybe not. Kind of depends. If I'm working with the student in kind of those intermediate level grades, I usually have to do a lot of work on identifying those elements within something that we're reading or something that we're listening to, right? How do we know what a subtopic is of a main topic? How did I know what the main topic was? What are some of my clues for figuring out those things that I write down? Okay, so that's kind of one of the first skills we're working on. Once we sort of have this format written out, and then we will be using that LA binder page for reference, we start practicing with some probably pretty easy expository text, and we're working on how am I figuring out what the pieces are that sort of fit in those different levels from something that I'm reading. And there's a couple skills we need to practice here. One, even identifying whether or not you have a main topic, a subtopic, a detail of that subtopic. That's difficult for students. And the second skill we work on is once I've identified kind of where I'm slotting a piece of information on my outline, is then I'm working on what do I write down? What does that note actually look like? Because what we don't want kids to do, and they will sort of naturally want to do this, especially if they're reading something, is if they've identified something they think is a main topic, they want to like copy that whole sentence down. And we then instead need to practice what does a note look like that's going to be sort of smaller and a little bit reduced and like trying to use more efficient language or more concise language compared to maybe the entire thing that was already written out. Because if I write out the entire thing that I've read, I've not taken a note. I've just copied. I've done some copy work. And I haven't actually helped myself at all, because it would take me a very long time to basically copy the entire thing that I'm reading, as opposed to just writing down the important things that then allow me to go back through, quickly read, remember the gist of it, remember the important main ideas, the important details, and move on. We're wanting basically the most important pieces from something that we've read, not everything that we read. And that's a difficult skill to begin to sort through those levels of understanding. And also, how do we kind of work on note-taking language? Like, what does that look like? This process will involve a lot of modeling with students, okay? This is just an article I had pulled up with one of my students because it felt like a relevant topic in responding to our world right now. We also were wanting to not maybe stick with some of the scary information going on about, coronavirus and all the stuff that's on everyone's mind right now. But maybe something that was a little bit more tangential. It was a question one of my students had brought up where they're suddenly hearing the word immune system and immunity all the time now. That's kind of a buzzword now. And, like what is that? What does that mean? How are people talk about having a weak immune system or a strong immune system, and how do I make myself have a good immune system? And so we decided to just do a little bit of research. We just Googled and got an expository article on ways to boost your immune system. And so we pulled that up and we practiced outlining information with that article. What I've done today is I have basically printed a part of that article on a piece of paper so that you can kind of see when I'm talking about what I might do with students. This is just part of that article. And the reading level of this isn't too tricky. I would expect, your average 4th or 5th grader to be able to read this article pretty well, okay? And what we would start doing is I would say, okay, we're going to look at this article. Right off the bat, you have some skills. There are clues in expository text that give us an idea of some of those big topic words and what they might be. Often a title could be considered a main topic if you're taking notes about something. And often we'll get these little subheaders or articles will be sort of in sections that make really good subtopics. So right off the bat, when you're looking at this, what do you think we might write down as our first Roman numeral for the main topic here? And I might have them pick a color that's going to be, that's going to kind of correspond to main topics and highlight. And so what I did is I started this here, but I didn't want to do the whole thing ahead of time. Is we would pick maybe orange is going to be our main topic. And the main topic of what we're writing about here is ways to boost your immune system. Now, I just want to let you know, the reason I'm letting that kind of be a main topic is because we could maybe have this bigger topic of just immune system, learning about the immune system, in which case ways to boost your immune system would be our first Roman numeral main topic, but you could have other main topics about the immune system that come up as you keep exploring the immune system, like maybe what are the different elements of the immune system? How does the immune system fight viruses and infections, right? Those could be different main topics that come up. So ways to boost it is kind of your main topic, and we made that orange. And then what I'd have them do is on their outline piece of paper, they're going to color code and use an orange pen or whatever, or maybe that same orange highlighter, to write their Roman numeral, and then they write that header. Now, you'll notice what I've written here was not all of the same words. So a second skill we practice is first identifying what's our main topic, and we color code to match. But the second strategy I use is before we even write anything down, I've had them highlight this, and then what I have them do is take their highlighter or pen or whatever color, I might use a different color so that it kind of stands out, and start kind of looking for what do they think are sort of the key words or the most important words that I have to make sure I at least include when I write the note so that the note makes sense to me when I read it later. I don't necessarily have to write ways to boost your immune system, right? I could. That's not that long of a main topic. But the most important words we're going to kind of work on underlining. So my student might think immune system is important. I would agree. And what specifically are we talking about doing to the immune system here, I might ask them. And then they're looking at those words. Which word is important? The thing that we're talking about doing here is boosting. So I would say, in whatever header you write now, you want to make sure you've included the word boost and you've included the word immune system. And sometimes I might say, you might be able to also use a version of some of these words that isn't the same word, but is a version of that. So are there other versions of the word boost you could use if you wanted? And I might have them make a note above the word boost. Well, if I wanted, instead of saying boost, I could say improve. And I would probably give one example and then see if they could come up with an example. What else? I mean, maybe let's see if we can just come up with another example for immune system. Have you heard another word that people might use instead of immune system? They might talk about I might have to help them with this. They might talk about your immunity. So we might write that down on top. Immunity. And now I've given them some choices. We're making a note from this header. We know it's going to be our main topic. We know we have to include at least the words boost and immune system, pointing backwards, but I have the option of using some of my own vocabulary instead. I don't have to use the same words. That's part of note-taking. Sometimes we put things in our own words. We call that paraphrasing. That's an important skill. Instead of boost, I could say improve. Or maybe if we came up with a couple words, you have some options. Instead of immune system, I could have said immunity. And so at the very least, I need these two words, but I also have to make sure that what I write makes sense. So if I just wrote boost immunity, that might work out okay. I might want to add to it a little bit and write something like boosting your immunity. That makes a little bit more sense, right? And we kind of would play with this. Would boost immunity, if you looked at that later, would you know what that meant? Maybe you would. That's the very least of what we could write. Boosting immunity makes more sense to me. I wrote ways to boost immunity because I wanted to make sure it was pretty clear, but it's still just a few words. And I had reduced the words by not adding your, and I changed immune system to immunity, so my note didn't take quite as much time. So I would probably have my own piece of paper, and I'd have my student have their piece of paper, and we both would practice, I'm going to turn this into a note, and let's compare our notes and see how they look when we're done. I chose ways to boost immunity. I keep pointing the opposite way. Ways to boost immunity, and I know that is my main topic because it's orange. I'm not going to go through this whole article, but I'm just going to take you through one more piece of it here. You'll see that I had written out some more of it there. So just within the stay active section, a lot of times articles and textbooks will really give us a good sense of what the subtopics are because they tend to be those kind of subheaders of the sections of something that you're reading. So I would probably tell my student that. And then say, we have a clear subheader here under boosting your immunity. What is our subheader? Let's highlight that in green. And so they're looking and it should kind of stand out to them what is kind of that next sub-main topic. And so we've highlighted stay active green. Now I might say to them, okay, now I'm going to hand you your red pen and we're going to figure out what are the words that are necessary to write down for this. When it's something this small and it's just a title, you often could just copy it if you want. But you may have some options, so both words are probably necessary. I think the most necessary word, I might say, what's the most necessary word between stay and active? It's maybe a good skill to discuss. Is staying what we're talking about, or is activity what we're talking about? Okay, active is actually my most important word, so I at least need that. The other word there was only one more word, so I could just copy that if I wanted. Instead of activity, do you have any other options for what you could write if you wanted to use your own words? Like maybe being active doesn't make a ton of sense to you, so when you go back and read your notes, you'd rather write something like, what? What does being active mean you're doing? Exercise, right? Some people use a different word or term for exercising. They might say working out, workout. So next to that, I wrote some options, but I would probably give the student one here and say, you could, because it's only 2 words. This one is easy to copy. It's pretty efficient already. You don't have to do a lot of work on that one. And in fact, you'll notice I made it green to color code. I indented, I'm on the wrong side. I gave it a capital A because it's my first subtopic, and I just copied it because I'm lazy, and it was already there, and it was already a note. It was already pretty short. Stay active. Okay? Then what we do beyond that, I just realized I'm missing some of my letters on here. I forgot to fill in. What we do beyond that is we read an entire chunk at a time. So if I'm looking at this, let me hold the article back up. I would say, okay, looking under the stay active section, the stay active subtopic, how many chunks do you see across this section? Hopefully your student, you kind of discussed some paragraphing. If not, I would probably talk about how paragraphs are chunks of information. So we actually see 3 chunks across this section of the article. And I would say we're going to read an entire chunk, or at least read half of a chunk, before we decide what we're writing down on our notes. And remember, not everything we read needs to become a note. In fact, our goal is to kind of reduce it to just the important stuff. And that's hard to figure out. You'll notice that students will struggle to figure out what is the important stuff and what is something I didn't really have to write down. That's not information I need to recall later. So you'll have to do a lot of modeling and a lot of practice to help them with this. But I'm just going to read out loud what the first half of this first paragraph says. So it says, working out is a powerful way to boost your immune system, says Mark Moira, MD, MPH, Jenkins, Pokemner, Director, Preventative and Alternative Medicine at the University of Michigan Medical Center. Okay? It causes your body's antibodies and white blood cells to circulate more rapidly, which means they may be able to detect and zero in on bugs more quickly. Being active this way also lowers stress hormones, which reduces your chances of getting sick, Moira adds. That was that. I actually read the whole first paragraph of that section. That was this whole chunk right here. Okay? Then I would say, okay, what color do we want our details to be? And let my student pick. I like to have lots of different brightly colored highlighters. Okay, so we're going to say maybe it's blue. And we are looking at that first paragraph, and we're like, all right, let's read at least the first sentence or 2, probably at least the first sentence, and decide if we think we have a detail that is important there. That first sentence was, working out is a powerful way to boost your immune system, says Mark Moira, blah, 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 blah. All of that person's credentials and where they come from. So I might say to my student, of everything it says in that first sentence, which part feels like the detail and which part feels like extra information we don't need to write down? Usually when it's people's credentials and stuff like that, they can kind of get that idea pretty quickly, but maybe not. You might have to help them figure that out. But we might figure out that really the first fact it gives is the most important detail. All the stuff about who said it and where they came from is not something I need to take a note on. So I would have them highlight that first fact, which I let them highlight the whole thing. The first fact was working out is a powerful way to boost your immune system. And we highlighted that. Okay? Then we take our red pen and we're like, all right, we know we want this to be a detail. Underneath what? Underneath staying active, it's going to be our first number one. We might have to look back at our LA binder to remember what symbol we use when we have a detail, okay? It's going to be our number one under staying active. And now I have to figure out how to make that a note. Working out is a powerful way to boost your immune system. So we take our red pen and we're going to kind of underline some of those key words that we think are the important pieces. What are we talking about here? I always ask them, I kind of go to some grammar. What is the subject of this sentence, of this statement? The subject's probably important, so let's underline that. Working out. And then what does it say about working out? Well, it says it's powerful, so maybe that's an important word. And what does it say that it does? Oh, its action is that it boosts your immune system. So working out can do what? Well, it can be powerful to boost immune system. So we've underlined those words that we think are the important pieces. And then I would remind them, again, depending on their age, we might keep making notes about alternative words to kind of work on when I can put things in my own words. How do I do that? What does that look like? Or I might just have them do it verbally, especially if they have some good verbal skills. So with the student I was working on this with earlier, he's writing impaired. He has dysgraphia, but his language skills are off the charts. I mean, he's very verbal. He has a great vocabulary. His comprehension's right on up there. So I just said to him verbally, knowing him as a student, I said, okay, I would have said something like, if our first sentence is working out is a powerful way to boost your immune system, how can we reduce that and just keep the main pieces? And he would just repeat back to me kind of in his own words, well, working out, causes or boosts immunity, right? And we could write something like that, okay? I may have students keep reading. I might say, well, if we write working out boosts immunity, are we really saying anything different than what we've already written down, which is that our main topic is ways to boost immunity and our first subtopic is staying active? And then if we make our first detail, working out boosts your immunity, is that different from what we've already said in our main topic and our subtopic? Not so much. So we may choose actually to wait and not write down that working out boosts your immunity because we feel like we've kind of already said that. Let's see if it says anything else about working out that could be our first detail. All right, so let's read the next sentence. So the next sentence says, it causes your body's antibodies and white blood cells to circulate more rapidly, which means they may be able to detect and zero in on bugs more quickly. Okay. All right. So what feels like a detail there? Kind of the first detail that was written. Oops, wrong pen color. Well, you can highlight the whole thing. It's that working out. What was that it's referring to? Oh, that was referring back to working out. We might even draw an arrow to remind us that actually this is still talking about working out. So now it's saying something new about working out. So maybe this should be our first detail. And what does it do? It causes your body's antibodies and white blood cells to circulate more rapidly. That was the first thing it told us. And I let them highlight that entire thing. We drew our arrow that this is referring actually back to working out. So this is the first time we're actually saying something new about working out. We don't really need to write that it boosts our immune system because I did already write that down as my main topic, right? So that was kind of just a topic sentence. I don't need to write that again. And remember, we're trying to be efficient. That's what note-taking is all about. But this is new. It says that working out causes your body's antibodies and white blood cells to circulate more rapidly. So now we're going to look at that. That's a lot of words. I don't want to write all that down. So can I underline the key stuff? Okay, well, the action is that it causes, what is it causing? some interesting science things. Antibodies and white blood cells. I might decide to write white blood cells. I could maybe decide to just choose the most basic noun there, which would be cells. Because white and blood, if you've done any grammar together, and this is great grammar work, white and blood are actually just adjective words. Ugh, it's so hard to that describe the word cells. Okay, and then what do they cause cells and antibodies to do? To circulate rapidly. So I've underlined those words as well. And I would have the student, by the way, the student is the one who has the pen and is doing that. Through discussion, we figure out what those keywords are. Okay, and then they can decide either to use some of their own words or use just those keywords to write down their note. We probably are going to want to redefine what it is, and we know it is referring to working out. So through all of that, we end up deciding we've written down workout, causes, bodies, antibodies, and cells. And in fact, I'm now realizing, looking at this, that I maybe didn't need the word bodies. I could have just written workout, causes, antibodies, and cells to circulate. And instead of rapidly, I decided to write better, because I assumed more rapidly was a better thing. Now it's kind of an assumption. A student might not feel comfortable with that. They might want to write rapidly or faster. What's another word for rapidly? Faster, right? And so they could decide to write that as well. In fact, I like to, if I'm doing my own notes and they're doing their own notes and then we compare, I like to try to model using some other words here and there to show that I can, if I understand what the word means, I don't have to use that word. I can use a different word. I can paraphrase, okay? All right, that sentence wasn't over, but it's still talking about working out. It continues. It says, which means they may be able to detect and zero in on bugs more quickly. So is that a whole new fact or detail? Or is that something that kind of is still talking about the antibodies and white blood cells and what happens when they circulate? We might need to have that discussion. If it's still talking about those, it's sort of a extra piece of that, then I might want a whole new color because I have a sub detail now. So which means they may be able to detect and zero in on bugs more quickly. I highlighted in pink because that's now a sub detail of my blue. And we're going to detect our main words. So now they can detect bugs quickly. If they're circulating more rapidly, they detect bugs more quickly. And I underline those keywords. And that becomes color-coded our sub detail. Trying to point to it here. A, and instead of detect, I wrote helps them fight bugs. I just sort of rephrased that whole thing. And I like to model that for my students. Our students may want to write down detects bugs quickly. That's okay. I often let them do a lot of just reducing of the same words that are already on there to work on, okay, I don't need to write this whole thing, but I'm still working on a note-taking skill. And then over time, we also work on adding in some paraphrasing. If I think a student can handle both right off the bat, I'll have them try to paraphrase occasionally by saying, okay, besides, instead of detects, is there another word you could say? Finds. Yeah, sure. What does detecting mean? Oh, it means that you find something. Sometimes you have to phrase it that way for students to realize you're asking for another word. What does that word mean? You do know another word for it, right? And what is bugs talking about? Bugs is a pretty short word, so it makes a nice note, but it's talking about viruses, infections, right? Sicknesses, right? Or sickness, okay? And then quickly, you could write faster. There's many options to rephrase that, okay? And then we keep working through expository text like this with lots of practice. Students begin to improve in their ability to figure out what are the necessary words in something I've read that can then become a note. They also get better at figuring out what is the hierarchy of what I'm reading. What's a main idea? What's a subpoint? What are the details within that subpoint? When did I move back out to a main idea? I like articles like this because the next one is something like diet or eating healthy or something like that. And it's pretty obvious that we've moved on to a new subpoint about boosting your immunity. So then we get to practice moving back out, and now we have details all about diet, no longer about staying active. So when I start to work on this kind of skill with students, I look for articles that and expository text that tends to kind of do that. It's not hard because it's almost all articles that do that. And in fact, especially textbooks are set up in this outlining way. And then the last little piece I want to leave you with today, lest I talk too long, which I already have, is to make sure you have some meta discussion with your student about the purpose of note-taking. Why are we doing all of this? What does this, because I'm trying to be a pain and force you to spend time on something you don't want to spend time on? Believe it or not, no, right? What does this do for you if I then look back at something that looks like this? And we talk about, I have students give me some reasons, right? I always pose the question to them, and I'm like, what's one thing you think this might do for you? And see if they can give me some reasons. Usually kids are pretty good at kind of realizing, what's nice about this is that the words are a lot shorter when I look back over what I wrote. In fact, often I'm trying to get you to expand your thoughts, and here is one time where I'm telling you, make it smaller. We only want the very basics. You don't need to be super, super expansive. You don't want to copy an entire sentence. I want you to be efficient. I want this to be like, boom, I'm reading back over this and I immediately know kind of what this was about. I don't have to reread 4 paragraphs to remind myself what it was about. And then what might be the benefit of putting things in your own words? Especially if you were reading something that was kind of tricky and had some language that was tricky. What then might be the benefit of putting it in your own words? So then when you go back and read it, what? Oh, it makes more sense, especially if there were some words that were tricky. And one cool thing we might practice doing with something that had some really big words is putting that vocabulary word in there, because maybe we need to know it. Maybe we're supposed to learn it. Maybe we don't want to forget it, and improving our vocabulary is always better. But then defining it for ourselves in our note. That's where that whole thought or detail part comes in. You can write your own little extra stuff that will help you later. If I don't know what immunity means, I may want to make a note on there that says immunity equals what? And we have a discussion about that, and we figured it out, and I write my note so that when I go back and read it and I remind myself, this is about immunity. What is immunity? Oh, I have a note here that says immunity equals how your body fights bad things, right? How your body fights infection or bugs. Oh, I will show you one student sample. This was actually my dysgraphic student who's working on cursive. I shouldn't say working on. He's completely adapted to cursive and is a fluent cursive writer now. He did want to look up an article about COVID-19 because, of course, we were talking about it. And so that's what this one was. This article was complex, and actually it changed on us halfway through, which was kind of funny because it was being updated as new research is coming out. And so he was working on outlining. And you notice there was like a mistake at one point. He thought something was going to be a subpoint and then sort of realized maybe actually that was probably moving on to a whole new main topic, right? We were trying to reduce our language in point A down there under main point 2, subpoint A. Everyone should practice, and then it was like, oh wait, really? This could just say social distancing. So we were kind of practicing, okay, where can we kind of make sure that our language is as efficient, as concise is a word I teach students as possible, okay? And this moves on to the back page. There's a couple different colors going on here. Now, I did not make this student color code because he's much older. He's like 18. He was able to track that kind of information. Like I said, he's also not language impaired, so he was very good at figuring out what was a detail, what was a main idea, what needed to go under what. We were mostly actually using this as practice with working on how to reduce language when you take a note. That was kind of his big thing. And then also lots of writing practice for him. Let's see, how do you help a student to see that it is a sub-detail, not just a sub-detail? Yeah, and then actually I think that was Rita who responded, talking about what's most interesting versus a middle interest versus a least interest. just taking 3 parts and moving them around to decide can be helpful. What I do with students too is when we do the color coding, they actually start to be able to see things that have kind of nested under something else. And we use a lot of grammar talk to help them figure that out. So for example, in the sentence, it causes your body's antibodies and white blood cells to circulate more rapidly, which means they may be able to detect and zero in on bugs more quickly. If I ask them what the subject is of that second part, what is they referring to? Oh, well, I have to read it a couple times. I think it's referring to the antibodies and white blood cells. So that indicated to me that I hadn't actually moved on to a new detail. It was a second thought, but because I'm still talking about the antibodies and white blood cells, that can go underneath my detail about antibodies and white blood cells. So use some grammar work to identify pronouns and identify subjects, which will give you a sense of what actually was a whole new thought versus what actually was following that previous thought and is still about the same topic. Pronouns particularly are a nice indication of that, because if you say something like it or they, you're not really moving on. You're commenting on something that was previously stated. Yes, sounds like a dependent clause is a clue, and you can do that. You could set up. Now, I don't like to say always because you'll probably run into a time when it wasn't. But yeah, you can start to set up some grammar clues that can give you an indication of the hierarchy of how the details are being organized. Very good point. So like if a clause is dependent on something else, it's probably sub, right? It probably isn't a whole new. As opposed to if you have 2 independent clauses, you maybe just have 2 details. They might not go together, right? So that's a very excellent point. And then also the other grammatical thing you can look at is pronouns. Give an indication that it's still commenting on something that was previously stated, because I didn't name a whole new subject. I used a pronoun to refer to a previously stated subject. So that would probably be sub, okay? Post-its, very, very helpful. You don't have to create your first outline on paper. You can create an outline using all Post-its on a table. That is something I've done before. And because I couldn't use my document camera, I was trying to use more paper, so it was easy for me to hold stuff up and show you. But yes, your outline practice for a while could be moving Post-its in so you get that hierarchy look before you start kind of doing it on paper. I do often then like to try to, over time, translate things to paper so kids start practicing that kind of note-taking skill, that sort of typical note-taking skill. And then the fun thing is you can start bouncing around in different mediums. Start with something slow, like that you can do at a slow pace, like reading something, reading an article or reading something from a textbook. But over time, you can maybe try some little videos, TED Talky type videos. Those are awfully long. But you can just do little informative videos about any topic your student is interested in. They may have an increased level of understanding of some of the hierarchy of information then, and might be more successful with creating a note-taking hierarchy with a topic they've maybe already learned a little bit about because they're very interested in it. But yeah, I'll do little videos. Just be aware. You're going to have to pause all the time through a video so that you can discuss, figure out, did I just hear a piece of information I need to write down? And I'm going to write it down now, okay? We are preparing students for the inevitable situation in which they are expected to read something and take notes on it because there's going to be a quiz on Friday or something like that. Or they are expected to read something and retain it because 3 months down the line, there's a test, right? We don't want to just read stuff and never write down notes. Our brains will forget things. That's the reality of it. Or also when you're sitting and listening to someone speak on a topic and that's all you get and your notes are the only information you can rely on to then study later. We have to actively practice this kind of stuff. And it's good to start, once kids have active writing skills, and they're pretty fluent writers, it can be, by which I mean, they can write at a sentence level. I start working on note-taking if I can.